When people think about the most famous female fashion designers of the 20th century, the first answer is probably Coco Chanel. But many people actually don't know about probably her biggest rival, Elsa Schiaparelli. Well, to be fair, recently I think more and more people discover Elsa Schiaparelli because the house now had a major revival under Daniel Roseberry, the creative director, and also there are more and more books or exhibitions about Elsa Schiaparelli. One of these exhibitions is at the V&A in London. If you want me to cover this exhibition, I'm going to visit it, so let me know in the comments below. Both Chanel and Schiaparelli moved in the same circles. They also probably had the same aspirations, and it is said that when Coco Chanel followed the emergence of Elsa Schiaparelli, she furrowed a brow, and they are very interesting in their own right. So when we look at Coco Chanel, what did she do? She famously contributed to freeing women from the corset with clothes that were easier to wear. It was more casual at times where women's wear was still very, very complicated. But Elsa Schiaparelli was groundbreaking in a different way. It was not about ease of wearing, it was more about shocking. And this is a term that is so closely linked with Elsa Schiaparelli because it not only explains her designs, it was also the name of her first perfume. And it's also used for shocking pink, which is the color that's also so closely linked to Elsa Schiaparelli. And she also used it in her autobiography, Shocking Life. For me, I never really focused on that rivalry. I was really interested in both designers. I discovered Elsa Schiaparelli when I was a teenager because of her lobster dress. And what I found so interesting was, first of all, it looked very different, but then there was this close link to the arts, and I have always been fascinated with this link between fashion and art. And famously, Elsa Schiaparelli collaborated with a lot of artists, and probably the most famous was Salvador Dali, who was the reason for this lobster dress, and Elsa Schiaparelli also gave credit to the artist. But who was this Elsa Schiaparelli? Before I dive in, very, very quickly, housekeeping. This is a non-sponsored video, I'm just sharing my personal opinion and my research here. Everything I say is alleged and for entertainment purposes only. Elsa Schiaparelli is closely associated to Paris, but she's actually Italian. She was born into quite a privileged family. Her mother was an aristocrat and her father was a professor for Oriental literature. What I find even more interesting is actually her uncle, because he was a very famous astronomer. And we see that astronomy was a topic that Elsa Schiaparelli thought about a lot. We will see later on she very often used the term moonstruck. That could be a link to her uncle, but also she designed a collection with influences from astronomy. So we can already see how her childhood also influenced her designs. And Elsa did not start shocking people when she was a grown-up. Already at the age of 21, she published, let's call it, sensual poems. And what did her parents do? They sent her to a convent in Switzerland. But very soon Elsa escaped from that convent and she made her way to London. Before she left that convent, she actually went on hunger strike. So she then went to London to help out a friend with her children, and she met Count Wilhelm Wendt de Kerlor, and she married him in 1914. In 1916, they went to New York together, and on this journey to New York on the ship, she met Gabrielle Picabia, and this was a life-changing encounter because Gabrielle Picabia ended up introducing Elsa Schiaparelli to many artists, the Dadaists, but also Man Ray, who would later take pictures of Elsa Schiaparelli's designs, or also Marcel Duchamp. Elsa and her husband lived from her dowry and they had quite an expensive lifestyle. It was not cheap to be Elsa Schiaparelli and her husband, so that dowry was dwindling quickly. In 1920, her daughter Gogo was born, and she got increasingly frustrated because she took care of Gogo. It was also her money in the end, and her husband was very absent, so she asked for a divorce, and in 1922 she moved to Paris. She chose Paris because her daughter had an illness, and in Paris she considered that there was better treatment for her daughter. Elsa, we could say she was kind of a hustler. She worked for antique dealers during the day, but then at night she mingled with the artists in the famous cafes and bars. And one day she actually accompanied an American friend to Paul Poiret. Of course, she knew about the designer, and she then also wrote about this in her autobiography. She said she was moonstruck, again we have this term, by his designs, but she knew that she could not afford the designs. And then she actually had a conversation with Poiret. She said to Poiret, "I cannot buy it, it's too expensive for me, and where can I wear this?" And then he is said to have replied, you can wear this anywhere. So he was fascinated by this woman. She was very special. He saw the opportunity. He probably thought, if this special woman wears my designs, this is good promotion for me. So he kind of made her a brand ambassador and said, don't worry about the money. And he actually sent her designs. So we could say Elsa Schiaparelli was one of the first influencers, but I would say she was more than just an influencer. In the 1920s, Schiaparelli started to work as a freelance designer, and she actually started off with knitwear. To put this into context, knitwear for women was relatively new. Coco Chanel already contributed to this so that it was more common that women wore knitwear also for daily wear. Before that, I would say it was more for sports or in that direction. Schiaparelli designed a black jumper which was closely fitted, and it had an optical illusion, a white bow at the top. And this is what Schiaparelli would also become famous for, these optical illusions, the trompe-l'oeil effect. And this sweater was knitted by an Armenian woman. She was a refugee, and Elsa Schiaparelli got introduced to her, and they started collaborating, and then they started a business together. And the first Schiaparelli designs were actually made by the Armenian community in the Parisian attics. And this very same community then started a factory and also kept supplying Elsa Schiaparelli. Elsa Schiaparelli set up her own brand in 1927, but it took another year until she really got known in 1928 when she opened her atelier at the Rue de la Paix. And her brand was Schiaparelli pour le sport, because it was sportswear at the time, and I think this was this link to the knitwear. And I already mentioned the optical illusions. This is something that Elsa Schiaparelli loved doing. There was another collection with skeletons where the women looked as if they walked through an X-ray. And yeah, today it's difficult to shock us, but when we think about it, late 20s, early 30s, this was not what you saw women wearing on the street. That was not normal, and it was shocking. She also used trompe-l'oeil insects, so they looked three-dimensional, for example. Like one of her most famous ones is the flies. She also incorporated zips into her designs. More than just using them, she made them a signature characteristic of the design. Sometimes she used colors to make them pop. So at the time where buttons or zips should be hidden, this was also something quite innovative, even though today this doesn't look that innovative anymore. Her madcap was actually so famous that it was also copied a lot. That's always the flip side of designing something very popular. And there are actually rumors that Elsa Schiaparelli regretted designing it because it was copied that much. Another thing that I always found really fascinating is her close connection to the arts. She had many artist friends who then also designed for her. For example, Alberto Giacometti made jewelry for her. Today, this is such a big name, and when you think about this, that she was like friends with him, and then she just said like, hey, can you make this jewelry for me? This is like absolutely amazing. Also, Roger Vivier designed shoes for her. I already mentioned in the video about him that he also worked for Dior, but also for Schiaparelli. She even worked with the House of Lesage for her embroidery, and I find this particularly interesting when we consider this let's say tension between Elsa Schiaparelli and Coco Chanel, because today Lesage is owned by Chanel. So there's another link of the two designers. So we have these daring or shocking designs, and you would think they were too shocking for many people, but it's actually not true. She had quite a big fan base, and she also dressed celebrities. For example, Greta Garbo, Katharine Hepburn, Marlene Dietrich, but most famously probably Mae West. And Elsa Schiaparelli had a life-size mannequin of Mae West's body in her atelier, so she could make all the designs exactly for her. This was like a very, very exact mannequin. And later on, she used Mae West's body for the bottle of her perfume Shocking. Because of that fame, of course, also the business expanded. In 1932, the name changed from Schiaparelli pour le sport. They also added pour la ville, pour le soir. So it was not only sportswear, it was also for the city and also for the evening, so day wear and evening wear. In 1934, she was the first female designer featured on the cover of Time. And at the time, she had 400 employees, and she also expanded the business to London and New York. Coming back to her perfumes, this first perfume Shocking was launched in 1928, and then it was soon followed by further perfumes, and she very often used this letter S for further perfumes, for example for Souci, Salut and Schiap. And then she also moved the haute couture to the Place Vendôme, number 21, and there were 700 employees who worked in this 5-story building, and on the ground floor there was the haute couture boutique. Another thing that a lot of people don't know is that Elsa Schiaparelli is closely connected to the newspaper print. When we hear newspaper print today, the first thing that comes to mind is John Galliano for Dior and the famous newspaper dress that made it into Sex and the City. But the newspaper print was actually not invented by Galliano. It was actually also not invented by Elsa Schiaparelli, but she promoted it because she was cutting out articles about her business, and then she came up with this interesting print. So we can already see she was quite innovative. And another thing that was innovative and also similar to Chanel was that she was inspired by menswear, and very often she also combined very bright colors, for example the shocking pink, with, let's say, black. So we always have this contrast, and all her collections always told a story. They always had a theme. For example, Le Cirque was about a circus. There was a pageant collection, and there was this astronomy collection that I mentioned before, which was a link to her childhood. And coming back to the collaborations with the artists, I already mentioned that probably most people know her collaboration with Salvador Dali. And I discovered her lobster dress as a teenager. It really caught my attention. Even such a long time after she created it, it still looked very interesting. And then I found out it was based on Salvador Dali's lobster telephone. And then Wallis Simpson wore this dress, and she was photographed by Cecil Beaton, because we can already see in which circles Elsa Schiaparelli was actually moving. Dali, Cecil Beaton, Wallis Simpson. So all of this came together. And Dali worked on many designs together with Elsa Schiaparelli, for example, the bottle for her perfume Le Roi Soleil, but also the shoe hat. So these are just two examples of many designs that they did together. Schiaparelli also collaborated with Jean Cocteau, and there's a very famous coat designed by Schiaparelli based on a drawing by Jean Cocteau, and Lesage did the embroidery, and this is very famous. It's even used also as one of the main pictures for this V&A exhibition. And what's interesting about Schiaparelli, for her, the clothes were basically her canvas to bring the art to life, we could say. Needless to say, the times also affected Elsa Schiaparelli. World War II in 1939, she asked her employees to take a pay cut to keep the business afloat. And the times were also reflected in her designs. For example, she created the cash and carry collection with big pockets. So if a woman had to run, she put on a coat, for example, and then she could just grab things and put them into these pockets and leave the house. Elsa Schiaparelli herself left for the US, and the business was then managed by Comtesse Hagen and the shop manager Madame Bergerie. In 1945, Elsa Schiaparelli came back to Paris, and she was actually hugely successful then in America. And at the time, Hubert de Givenchy and Pierre Cardin were actually working in her atelier. But the financial difficulties became bigger and bigger, and this was also because fashion had changed. There was the new look by Christian Dior, which was hugely popular at the time, and maybe Elsa Schiaparelli just did not fit into this anymore. In 1954, she closed her business, but she did not retire completely. She published her autobiography, Shocking Life, in 1954. Elsa Schiaparelli passed away in 1973, and then the house basically lay dormant for a very long time. It was resurrected in 2012, and in 2013 Christian Lacroix started to design haute couture for the house, and since 2019 Daniel Roseberry has been the creative director of the house. And since then I've also seen that the brand is gaining traction again. It's becoming popular again. I hope not too popular, because this is always the risk with these houses. But what I really appreciate about Daniel Roseberry is that he closely looks into the archives. We see a lot of the codes, we see the padlock or other elements that were very much Elsa Schiaparelli, but they feel modern, they feel not too literal. And this is something that I really appreciate, if a creative director manages to bridge this gap between the heritage and their own creative language, their own designs. So I'm quite excited to see what the future holds for Schiaparelli. And now I would like to hear your opinion. What do you think about Schiaparelli today? And what did you know about Elsa Schiaparelli herself? Are you Team Elsa or Team Coco? Or are you like me, that you appreciate the designs of both of them? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to do two things that really help us creators. Please like this video and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. If you prefer to read about fashion, you can also head over to thepinklookbook.com. I have a lot of articles there, and if you have time, you can also check out my fashion label Pelagona. And if you enjoyed this video about Elsa Schiaparelli, I have another video for you which may be interesting. Thank you very much for joining me in this video, and see you in the next one.